All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's installment of the Regional Report. This is a Gpec virtual series. Today's webcast, we will hear from leaders about Arizona's water position and what we can do to address current and future demands of this vital resource. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Eric Sperling. I'm the Managing Director here at STN. If you are not familiar with STN, we're a local media company based right here in downtown Phoenix. We have a streaming network that is available on the App Store or Google Play. All of our shows and segments are dedicated to local leadership, community growth, and actionable solutions. You can see Gpec CEO Chris Camacho up there, great segment on our Arizona Achievers portion of the app with him. You can check that out. So very excited to partner with Gpec on this virtual series. Some Gpec events to mention that we have coming up: an exciting Ambassador Social Hour in the queue on Tuesday, May 11th. That'll be from 3:30 to 4:30 via Zoom. The social hour is in honor of Economic Development Week and in partnership with several regional economic development groups across the state. So to learn more about getting involved with Gpec, please reach out to Nicole there. You can see her email on the bottom of your screen. All right, if this is your first time joining us on a regional report, some housekeeping items I'm going to go through real quick. Today's webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. Audience members will be muted and without video. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Gpec website and social media. I see we have a great live audience in attendance. You may submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to get to all those questions. Should you experience any technical difficulties at all, just try logging off, logging back in. That usually fixes it. And we've added a new feature, closed captioning. So to enable that on your screen, please click the CC button on the bottom of your screen there. You can see it. And then we invite you to share this information on social media. Please feel free to tag Gpec and use the hashtag #GreaterPHX together where appropriate. All right, we have three fantastic water policy experts joining us today. I'd like to welcome Grady Gammage Jr., founding member and partner at Gammage and Burnham, Christa McJunkin, Director of Water Strategy at SRP, and Sarah Porter, the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Sarah and Grady. They're going to provide a brief presentation on today's topic, including highlights from the newly published Watering the Sun Corridor Report. Quickly about Grady, one of the founders of Gammage and Burnham, and has a diverse 40-year career in law and public policy in Arizona. He's been the author of numerous reports issued by the Morrison Institute, including the one being discussed today. Sarah is both a graduate of Harvard and ASU and an accomplished attorney. She left her law career back in 2006 because she wanted to contribute to a collaborative effort to address Arizona's natural resource challenges. She now dedicates that focus to the Kyle Center for Water Policy at the Morrison Institute with Arizona State University. So with that introduction, I'd love to kick it over to both Sarah and Grady. I know you have some slides, so we'll give you guys the floor.
Grady, you're muted. That's what I'm here for.
Yes,
Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah did that on purpose. She was trying to get in first. So what we're going to be talking about today is a report that we have just issued called Return to Watering the Sun Corridor. This is an update of a report that was done in 2011. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the original report. And the original report in 2011, I wrote before the Kyle Center was created. It was just for the Morrison Institute. And it really had two parts. The first part was explaining how water supports the Sun Corridor. The Sun Corridor is the urban spine of central Arizona from Prescott Valley to the border. It's really Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County. So Phoenix, Tucson metro areas. There was a lot of lack of knowledge among the general public about where our water comes from, how much there is, those kinds of things. So the first half of this report explained that, how SRP works, how CAP works. And if you don't know that story and you want to, you can still get copies of this online, of the original report on the Kyle Center website or the Morrison Institute website. You can get to it either way. The second half of this report was an attempt to sort of quantify the sustainable water supply for the Sun Corridor and how much urban growth could it support. That in 2011 was a pretty robust report. And I felt we needed to update that because a lot has happened since then. So next slide. So here's some differences. The top part is what we said in 2011 was the sustainable water supply. And what this is very big picture and very gross level of detail. This is the water that comes into the Sun Corridor. SRP delivers about 800,000 acre feet a year on average. We, in 2011, had 250,000 of other surface water. Some of that is the San Pedro in southern Arizona. Some of that is the upper Gila. You will note the changes to 2020. We took 100,000 of that away. For those of you who don't know, an acre foot is an acre of land foot deep in water. It's about 325,000 gallons. We took 100,000 away because the waters of the upper Gila are just not going to be usable for urban purposes in the Sun Corridor. Natural groundwater recharge is the only groundwater we count because it needs to be sustainable. When you pump up groundwater, it's not there anymore. You've mined it. In 2011, the Arizona Department of Water Resources said that was 260,000 acre feet. They actually increased that number in 2020 based on new hydrology to 344,000 acre feet. Colorado River is the CAP. The CAP supply generally has been talked about as 1.5 million average acre feet per year. They can actually move more than that through the canal, but you will note the big change here. We took 300,000 of that out. That is an attempt to think about the impact of what's called the structural deficit, that the river has been over-allocated. This year, in fact, under shortage declarations, we're going to lose more like 500,000 acre feet. But on average going forward, we decided 300,000 was a good number. So the supply's gone down. Next slide. The second big change is, what do you assume about climate change? Structural deficit is about over-allocation of the river. Climate change is how much less are we going to get? In 2011, we took a 15% cut on everything for climate change. That was a US Bureau of Reclamation number, their best guess in 2011 for Colorado River reduction. We don't think that's enough anymore. Based on reviewing various sources, we're going to show three different numbers now, 20, 25, and 30. Sort of concentrate on the middle one. That says our sustainable supply is about 1,870,000 or 1.9 million acre feet of water a year. Next slide. So here's the actual current water use in the Sun Corridor. Now, you remember the last slide, I said 1.9 million is the sustainable number. You will see the top line there is above 3.5 million. We're using a lot more than our sustainable supply. The big impact there is groundwater pumping. Even after the Groundwater Management Act, we're still pumping more than is renewed, primarily in Pinal County. And you'll see the components of that down below. If the components of the total water use were just municipal, industrial, and Indian, it would be right about 1.9 million. Most of the Indian use is agricultural. They intend to build up and do more than that in the Gila River Indian community. So there's still a problem, even if you got rid of all the agriculture, all the non-Indian agriculture in the Sun Corridor. Next slide. These are population projections for the Sun Corridor. Our current population is about 6 million. That's the line across. The median projection is 8.5 million by 2050. Next slide. This is a little complicated, but now, okay, we talked about supply. Now let's talk about demand for urban uses. You've probably all heard the acronym GPCD, gallons per capita per day. That is an approximation of how much each person in the Sun Corridor uses on a daily basis. The problem is the way we calculate that only counts municipal deliveries and private water company deliveries. There's a whole bunch of what in this slide are shown as non-per capita based uses that still increase with population. Those are things like golf courses with their own wells, parks, dairies, feedlots. Those are agricultural uses that locate in or near cities. Down at the bottom, you'll see things that we do not include in urban water uses because they're not located where they are to be near people. The big one is commercial agriculture. If you got flat land and you got water, we got lots of sunshine in Arizona, you can grow crops. It doesn't need to be near a city. So that we don't count as an urban use. Next slide. This is the good news. Per capita use has been going down. These are the numbers you will generally hear about how per capita use in Metro Phoenix, for example, is in the 120 GPCD range. In Tucson, it's much lower than that. The Sun Corridor use overall is about 110. Unfortunately, because of the way we count GPCD, it doesn't count those other urban uses. So the next slide will show much higher numbers. You will note here that the Sun Corridor number is up more like 225 to 250 gallons per capita per day. That's the magnitude of those uses that are not typically captured. And in both these slides, you'll note that the decline is flattening. We're not getting as much more efficiency in water use as we were initially. Next slide. Okay, so here's the punchline. In 2011, based on the median 2 million acre foot supply, we thought we were looking at 150 gallons per capita per day as a realistic goal into the future. The conclusion was, we got enough water to support 11.7 million people. That gave people a lot of comfort back in 2011, frankly, too much comfort. It seemed to be a long path for lots of growth without our having to do anything. The impact of the structural deficit, climate change, and GPCD not going down as much as it was is shown in the bottom chart. Take the middle range, 25% climate change hit, and assume that we hit 175 GPCD, which is still significantly lower than what we currently have, and the number is 8.5 million. We're at 6. So it's not a ton of remaining growth. At current rates of growth, that's 10, 15 years, something like that. And that assumes the complete elimination of agriculture in the Sun Corridor, which is an unrealistic assumption. So the point is, it's less easy headway to continued growth than we had before. Let's go to the next slide. So I don't want you all to take that as gloom and doom. There are not very many cities in the West that could show 10 or 15 years worth of growth without doing anything. But we need to be thinking about where we go. And here are some of the things we need to be thinking about. Increased conservation will further lower the GPCD number. It doesn't create new water. It just means we use it more efficiently. Additional storage is more of a hedge against climate change. Storage smooths out a highly variable supply. Greater reuse, same thing, will lower GPCD and be more efficient. For all of you interested in Gpec, it suggests that we should think about the kinds of industries we want to encourage and the nature of the water demand they create. Truly augmenting supply, cloud seeding, maybe. I don't know anything about cloud seeding, so I'm not going to talk about it. Desalting seawater is sort of viewed as the ultimate solution to all this. It is unfortunately still too expensive to do, but it'll get there eventually. The two more likely short-term solutions are importation of water, either from remote groundwater basins in western Arizona, where growth is unlikely to ever occur, or importing water from the main stem of the Colorado River. In either case, these things would be moved, this water would be moved through the CAP canal. Not CAP water, but moved through the canal. And both of those are likely short-term solutions to this problem as we work on things like desalting ocean water. Next slide. Is there another slide? I think there is. Nope. Okay. That's the end of these slides. This morning, Sarah and I did this presentation in like 45 minutes, and we had a lot of slides. So any of you who are hearing this, who are so fascinated by it, that you want to hear a solid hour, give us a call. We'll try to find a time to do it, and we can show you more slides. The overall message here, for those of you who care about Arizona's economic development, is we're not in desperate condition, but we don't have as robust a water portfolio going into the future as we thought we had in 2011. We've been ahead of this stuff. Arizona's been good at it, and we need to stay good at it. And we can do that as long as we take it seriously and talk about it a lot. Sarah?
Well, I think your overall message is even a bigger one than that, which is that the choices that we make about our water resources define the community we live in. And so we are, when we get to these points where we're thinking about how much water do we have available and how do we move water from one use to another, we begin to redefine the shape of the community. And I think that's the genius of Grady's approach to thinking about these things. It's a way of helping people see that it's not simply about plumbing. It's really about how we define the space that we live and work in.
Sarah, Grady, thank you guys so much. Please stick around. We will have some moderated chat coming up, as well as some audience questions. I want to bring Christa into the conversation now. Christa is a lifetime water professional. Her experience on topic ranges from the manager of the Office of Assured and Adequate Water Supply with the Arizona Department of Water Resources to a water resource analyst for Fluid Solutions. She is now the director of water strategy with SRP, where she has worked for the last decade. So Christa, want to just kind of get your thoughts on what you just saw and some perspective after hearing from Sarah and Grady.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I think you'll see there's a lot of correlation between my remarks and what Grady and Sarah went over with you. But I'd like to, in particular, share SRP's perspective of Arizona's water position, really focusing in on how we meet current water demands and what it'll take to meet future water demands. It's really difficult to make sweeping general statements about Arizona's water position. Water resource availability varies widely across the state, and water tends to be very localized and a geography-dependent issue. But since this is Gpec, it really just makes sense for me to focus on the greater Phoenix area. That area has greatly benefited, in my point of view, from two key ingredients, and that's really contributed to our success with water resources. And those are advanced investment in water infrastructure and resources and smart regulations. Water resource infrastructure projects can take many years to come to fruition. And the growth of the Phoenix area has been based in large part on investments in infrastructure made decades prior to that growth occurring. This pattern began in 1903 with SRP, where farmers put their land up as collateral for a loan to build Roosevelt Dam to turn a flashy river system into a dependable water supply. With that water supply secured, as the agricultural land urbanized in the area, cities then invested in water treatment plants to take that water supply that was used for farming and instead treat it so it could be used to serve residential and non-residential growth. As the valley continued to grow outside the boundaries of Salt River Project, additional investments were needed, and those were made in the 70s and 80s for the building of the Central Arizona Project, or CAP. And that brings Colorado River water to Central Arizona. But that didn't stop there. We made additional investments. In the 1990s, 6 valley cities partnered with SRP in the United States to both reinforce and raise the level of Roosevelt Dam to capture additional flood flows. But this investment and this need to pay attention to these things in advance is not limited to just water infrastructure. There are other examples of advanced investment in water resources when you look at the cities who have entered into long-term leases of tribal CAP water, in many cases, dozens of years before the water was actually needed. But it was this advanced investment to secure the water resources in advance that made it possible for the greater Phoenix area to grow. We basically ask and answer the water question up front, and that's been key. So as we look to the future, we need to remember what it took to get us here and continue making those necessary investments in both water infrastructure and resources to facilitate growth on resilient water supplies. We cannot rest on our laurels. And so I wanted to give some examples of future water infrastructure investments that we see on the horizon. First, and this is something that Grady mentioned, is the importance of effluent as a growing supply that needs to be utilized effectively for eventual use as a potable supply. Today, the greater Phoenix area is really a model of prudent and effective use of wastewater, with an estimated of over 90% of the effluent produced in the valley being reused or recharged for future use. But there is a next step in effective use of effluent, and that will likely be direct potable reuse. A good year is anticipating this innovation by locating its surface water treatment plant adjacent to its wastewater treatment plant, so that when they are ready to leverage direct potable reuse, their existing treatment infrastructure is properly situated and they're ready to go. And that will be key to making effective use of wastewater in the future. Another example is the potential opportunity to restore and expand reservoir capacity on the Verde River. While the Verde watershed and the salt watershed are pretty comparable in terms of size and water production, the total storage on the Verde is a fraction of what we have on the salt. And that small amount of storage is actually further threatened by sedimentation at Horseshoe Reservoir. If you've ever been kayaking on the Verde River, you probably have noticed it naturally tends to have high amounts of suspended sediment. And when the water reaches Horseshoe Dam, the water slows down and it becomes still and allows the sediment to fall to the bottom of the lake, where it accumulates and lessens the storage capacity. So we've already lost a fair bit of storage at Horseshoe Dam. One of the solutions to address this issue would be to increase the size of Bartlett Lake to restore the lost storage capacity, and also capture additional flood flows so that that additional water can be put to effective use. This would actually secure an additional resource for future use to meet growth, the demands of growth. Another example of the importance of infrastructure is the need to be better prepared for the effects of climate change. SRP has worked with ASU to better understand how our watershed will respond to a warmer climate. And the result of that work has shown that a warmer climate will result in higher highs and lower lows. But in order to be prepared for this warmer future, we need to make sure we have adapted our system to store the higher highs so that we can use it during the lower low years. One way we are looking to do this is to make use of the flood control space at Roosevelt Dam for temporary storage flood flows. We are working with the Army Corps of Engineers to ensure that this can be done safely and pursuing a pilot project to test this concept. As Grady mentioned, looking into the distant future, eventually ocean desalination will become a reality that benefits Arizona. Arizona and the other Colorado River Basin states are working towards that in partnership with Mexico. Through the Arizona-Mexico Commission, we've been working on this topic, and last year published a study of potential sites for a desalination plant in Mexico. But as Grady mentioned, the cost is really prohibitive for implementing that solution. But like I said before, because of the long time horizon on bringing any project of this scope to fruition, we have to be looking at it now. But all of these projects, whether it's desal or investments in raising the size of raising the dam and increasing the size of Bartlett, they will take advanced investment and regional collaboration to bring them to fruition. We do have options, but as we've done in the past, we really need to work together and recognize that our desert location requires us to think about and invest in these issues years, even decades before they become problems. The second ingredient to our success with water resources has been prudent and effective regulations. This has resulted in a progressive system of water conservation programs for users in all sectors. Water conservation and using water efficiently really just needs to be a given, considering our desert location. One effort that SRP is committed to is a water conservation as part of our 2035 sustainability goals. Our goal is to save at least 5 billion gallons of water in partnership with Valley cities. Each city in the Valley has their own level of potential for additional conservation. We aren't looking to prescribe how each city should pursue their own water conservation goals, but instead we want to come alongside in partnership and help them meet those goals. Another way that we are working to support water conservation is through a research project with the U of A, research the relationship between power and water use at data centers. As many of you know, water use at data centers can be significant. Our goal with this project is to develop best practices for both design and operation with regard to efficiently using both water and power at data centers. A second aspect of Arizona's prudent water regulations has been the Assured Water Supply Program. Unique in the nation, this program requires that new growth within an active management area must show that they have a 100-year supply of renewable water resources before the growth can occur. Under this program, we as water managers working with the development community, we have to wrestle with these issues before a problem exists. And that's really been the key to having a secure and resilient water supply. So in summary, I want to emphasize that water has always been a top of mind issue for us in Arizona. We've been successful to this point through advanced investment, regional collaboration, and having the right prudent regulations. As we face new challenges to secure the necessary water resources for future growth, we must recognize the need for continued investment and the need to work together as we have done in the past. Thank you.
All right, Christa, thank you so much. All right, we're going to move on to some Q&A. Before we do, I have my own questions. You guys are, I introduced you as 3 water experts. I am not a water expert. And so I took a lot of that information. I guess we'll start with Grady. When you were saying we're using more than the supply we have, I'm part of that general population, or I just don't know. Like, how is that even possible? How are we using more than we have?
So we're pumping groundwater that once it is pumped and used isn't there anymore. So when you pump groundwater, you mine it. We call it mining for a reason. It's just like ore. When you pull it out of the ground, it's not there. Then we take it, we use it in various ways. We make it into water that is no longer usable in our current system because we don't reuse effluent for direct drinking water. And our systems are set up to use a lot of that groundwater. So we're using that, and this is what the Groundwater Management Act was supposed to get us to, what was called safe yield, which means you're only taking out as much groundwater as is being put back in by rainfall or other kinds of recharge. Complicated concept, that's the really simplistic explanation. We're not doing that. We're using groundwater that is not being replenished. So that's the difference between sustainable supply and non-sustainable supply.
Got it. And then my next question is all about cloud seeding. No, I'm kidding. You said don't ask you anything about cloud seeding. The thing that gets everybody excited, I don't know, the supply augmentation, and it said ocean water, and it said desalination, and you know, I've seen headlines about water, and again, without context, you could see, oh, there's going to be wars over water in a few years. The wars will be about water. And again, not knowing, being in general population, is this desalination process of ocean water? I know Christa was saying cost is an issue right now, but is this a huge solution for all of us?
It's not going to.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I would say it's not going to be a huge solution. It will be an important incremental solution. But if we were right on the coast, we might be able to think of using a lot more ocean water for urban uses. But what we're really looking at as Arizona is how to do an exchange and take another water user's Colorado River water in exchange for a desalination plant that the Arizona users would invest in. And the estimates are between 100,000 and 200,000 acre feet currently is a realistic amount of water to expect. And so the statewide water budget is between 6 and 6.5 million. I think, Christa, I might be off a little bit. In comparison with our statewide water demand, ocean desal is an important incremental solution, but it's not the grand big solution.
Are there plants right now up? Are there desalination plants up?
All over the US, all over the Middle East, and in some other areas, yes.
Yeah.
There are many, there's some in California, some in Florida. Yeah.
Part of the dilemma here, and we mentioned this earlier, is let's continue to use acre foot that you desalt under current systems takes an enormous amount of energy and winds up costing somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 an acre foot. That'll probably come down to $400 or $500 an acre foot as more plants are built. That can be used to replace potable domestic water supply in houses. They can afford to pay that. It can't ever be used to replace agriculture in Arizona, in my judgment. And those lines will never cross and have it make economic sense. Yeah. And it won't be something that we'll use to water landscape around houses, probably ever. So it can be a long-term supply, but it's not going to solve all of our problems.
Got it. Questions coming in live, and I'll just read them cold. This one's for Sarah. As urban population continues to grow, including new industry businesses, Are there any discussions on modifying town, city, county development office requirements around landscape requirements, specifically reducing requirement for trees, grass retention lawns, which require regular irrigation?
Cities do around, so this of course is a very local issue, and cities tend to have landscaping requirements for new development that relate to their water supply. And there are built-in incentives for new development to be very water efficient because we have regulations that tie growth to a 100-year water supply. And so there, we have incentivized landscaping efficiencies. And you'll see that, you see that very much in the newer growth areas. Not so much in the old areas that historically, for various historic reasons, tend to be more water rich.
Just something I'd like to point out about the connection between how we manage water and landscaping is that we have to keep in mind that we want to use water for its best purpose. And conserving to the point of, you could just pave everything and not have any irrigation.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't benefit our quality of life. So we want to use water for the right purposes. And we need to keep in mind the effect of the heat island and the need to have green spaces to make our city livable. There's smart ways to do that are water efficient, but we want to balance that. So it's not trying to get your water use down to as small as possible. You want to get it to the right level where you're getting the most benefit out of it. I'd also point out that from a demand hardening is a concern of mine, where if all of your water use is just cut down to the bone, in a future drought that is more severe than we are currently experiencing, we don't have anything to cut. And because of how water tends to be managed, many of our supplies are kind of use it or lose it. So if you don't have a way to save it, you're better off having a little buffer so that you could, stop irrigating your lawn in a severe drought. At least that's my view.
Yeah, I remember growing up in California in the late 80s, early 90s when we had different restrictions on, when we could flush the toilet, when we could water our lawns. And yeah, I see that. And back to your goal, right, to save 5 billion gallons of water. And is that what you were sort of alluding to? There's a goal to save the water, but also to use it wisely to create a better quality of life. Is that kind of where that number came from?
Yeah, it's a pretty modest number. I'll fully cop to that. And part of the reason for that modesty is to recognize the need to balance these various considerations. So the effects of climate change on the temperatures in local neighborhoods with their kind of palette of outdoor irrigation and landscaping is one of those considerations. So it's a modest goal, but we really want to focus on customizing our approach with the particular city, because each city is very different in their kind of landscape palette and what they want their city kind of quality of life to emphasize.
Yeah, and a question coming in, and again, just relating to my experience growing up in California, and anybody could answer this. How does Arizona compare to other markets in terms of the water supply, water demand imbalance?
So one of the things I typically tell people in Arizona, and those of you who are sort of Gpec ambassadors, I hope will take this forward, is I don't think there is another city in the arid West that could show you the kind of presentation we just showed you, that has thought as seriously or as carefully about where the water to support their future growth is coming from. LA is essentially at full utilization. They don't have other supplies they can point to support future growth. San Diego is frankly a little worse off than LA, I think. Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Denver also cannot easily tell you where the water supply to support adding another 1 million people would come from. But Phoenix gets the focus of sort of the Eastern press because we're big, because people don't understand how it works, and they know how little it rains here. And the sort of Eastern, I call it the Eurocentric worldview. You should only live where it is cold, clammy, and rains a lot. And if you live in a place where there's lots of sunshine, you are an unbridled hedonist who, is just being way too self-indulgent. Their view is it doesn't rain in Phoenix, there shouldn't be all those people there. And unfortunately, that permeates the way lots of America thinks about Phoenix. But the message, I think, we're actually in better position than most Western cities, maybe better than any other Western city.
I'd like to add to that, and that's one of the things that I'm always blown away by is how well large cities in the Southwest are doing with water supply. For the most part, they know what they're up against. Sometimes they're not able to achieve what they want to achieve because of political gridlock, and I think we see some of that in California for various reasons. But one of the things that was extraordinary in Arizona is that 40 years ago, when we passed the Groundwater Management Act, we also adopted a discipline of great transparency about water supply, about water use. I'm pretty sure it's unparalleled by other large cities in the West. So we know everybody here participating today can get very detailed information about who's using what water, how much water is going to golf courses in the greater Phoenix area or going to parks in the greater Tucson area. That enables us to be part of the larger discussion. We don't see that kind of transparency in other places. And I think it's really significant.
Eric, if I could, one more thing that we haven't mentioned yet today, that is a contrast between the Sun Corridor and other Western urban areas. We've been putting water back underground. We have banked between SRP, CAP, the city of Phoenix, and others. We've put in the underground water bank about 10 years worth of water demand. 10 years. Cut off everything else. No water's flowing into the system. The lakes have gone dry. We've put about 10 years worth of water back underground that we can bring up. Now, that's not the way you would use it. Yeah, you would bring up a little bit of it every year when you need it, if you need to make up. And it's like a savings account in the bank. You're hoping to keep it, to pass it on to future generations. But if you need to use it, it's there to use. Nobody else has done that. Nothing close to that. Nowhere else.
Grady, and this is for all, we just talked about, the supply. What areas of the state and region would you say are the most vulnerable for our water supply?
Well, let me put it this way. I think that the
outside of the SRP area, I can tell you it's outside of the 3-county CAP area.
Yeah. I think it comes back to multiple sources of supply. So the reason that SRP area and the CAP area is a reliable, has a reliable portfolio is multiple sources of supply. So they have, in our case, access to Verde and Salt River water, CAP water, groundwater, stored water, that Grady mentioned has been recharged and underground, as well as effluent. The parts of the state that rely on a single source of water, generally, and if it's groundwater especially, are the areas of the state that are most in jeopardy. Because if those water levels decline over time, which they likely will do if growth continues to occur based on them, their next supply of water is it's not identified, and the infrastructure necessary to secure it would be significant.
And I'll be bold and be even more specific than that. What Christa said is exactly right, and there really are two places in the state where we've seen an influx of large industrial agriculture in areas that are completely groundwater dependent. And so suddenly the existing non-replenishing, for the most part, non-replenishing supply is being used up a lot faster than people anticipated. So one place where we see declining groundwater levels is in southeastern Arizona, the Wilcox Playa. There is we're not seeing that yet, so far as I know. I don't think the data are in, but there is a big concern that that is also going to happen in Mojave County. Of course, there's the Colorado River there, but we're talking about large industrial agriculture that's moving in and drilling big new deep wells. So those are the places that probably are the most vulnerable right now.
Got it. And the follow-up question is, and you sort of answered this, Christa, but how do you anticipate their water position changing?
In those rural areas?
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that they'll have to wrestle with is regulation. I mean, one of the things that has set the Sun Corridor apart is that we have what are called active management areas that have a system of groundwater rights and conservation requirements, reporting requirements, metering requirements, all of these things that add up together to provide the transparency and management necessary to protect our water supplies. That's a really difficult issue to submit to additional regulation, and it's controversial. It's, and as an outsider, I can't tell them it's the right thing to do, but I think that it's something they'll have to wrestle with and decide if they want to have control over what their future looks like, or it's just a competition to the bottom, basically.
Question coming in here. The current viability of Arizona's Groundwater Management Act, how has Arizona's explosive growth impacted the implementation of the GMA?
So Sarah, I think that's.
Well, for the most part, I think we can celebrate the Groundwater Management Act. It really, it has really been the cornerstone of the water resilience of the Sun Corridor. And that's why we're having this webinar today and talking about growth and, adding new demand to our area, to the Sun Corridor. There are a few places in the Groundwater Management Act that could be improved. And so the Kyle Center produced a report in late 2019 that brought up concerns that we identified with the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. The CAGRD is essentially a program that enables developers to satisfy the safe yield or let's just say the safe yield requirements, the requirement that essentially pushed developers to use renewable water for development, they can avoid by enrolling in the GRD, and they are then permitted to use groundwater to supply the new development and rely on the CAP to replenish the water that is in excess, that's essentially mined in excess of safe yield. I'm kind of using terminology that's probably giving Christa stomach aches, but essentially, in our report, we identify concerns with the long-term sustainability of the GRD because it has proved to be a super popular program, and potentially, there are projections that half or more of the development that is expected in the coming decades will rely on this program of essentially a promise to go find the water and replenish so that we don't develop by mining away groundwater supplies. That, to my mind, is the biggest concern. It's not, at this point, it's not in a scary situation. We're at a very good opportunity where we can address this potential vulnerability, but we need to do it because we do expect to have less water coming off the Colorado River, as Grady's report shows, and a lot of other studies show, and it's not gotten so big that we can't fix that problem. There are other issues with grandfathered pumping rights that may call into question whether we can achieve safe yield, which has been a long-term goal of the Groundwater Management Act.
Yeah, I was going to that last point, just add two of the things that were sort of baked into the Groundwater Management Act when it was passed that I think we are now learning weren't sufficient to deal with the problem. The first is that the Pinal Active Management Area, the Groundwater Management Act created active management areas, was originally envisioned as a planned depletion, meaning you could mine the groundwater. There have been some changes in that over the years, but it was essentially a bargain cut to keep agriculture and business in Pinal County. That was short-sighted. And the other big problem is that it only covered these active management areas in the state. And there are now other parts of the state that aren't within AMAs that are very challenged about groundwater use, as Sarah pointed out. But creating an AMA now in those areas is a big political lift in a time when politics is not working very well for any purpose, including water purposes. So those, I think, are another couple of failures.
And I also want to point out that once a landowner has moved in and invested in developing out a big ag operation or invested in drilling new wells, they've made significant investors, and you can't just turn it off. So once this problem of fast groundwater overdraft sets in, it's very, very hard to solve unless you have a big new supply to replace the groundwater that they're relying on. So creating an active management area in these hot spots wouldn't fix the issue, because there isn't, and at least right now, we haven't identified that big new supply that will replace the water that those ag operations need.
Grady, question just coming in for you. In your work in the space, maybe this has to do with the answer. Has building a water pipeline from the Great Lakes or the Mississippi River ever been a tactic considered to support Arizona's water position?
Yes, and it won't happen. It is an idea that's thrown out periodically, particularly when you see those graphic television images of water flowing 6 feet deep down the main street of some small Midwestern town. You think, oh, geez, if we could just capture that. Despite the fact that there seems to be an excess supply of water there, that is not the way people there view it. They very much view water as this tribal commodity. Okay, the people with whom we share water are us. The people who want to take it away are them, and they're very protective of water in the Midwest. So the first reality is that I don't think it would be easy legally to get it away from there. The second reality is that water is heavy. Water is a very heavy commodity. It is very expensive to move it long distances. And the value, despite the fact that we say water is the new oil, the value is very different than oil. You can pay to transport oil long distances because it is so valuable. It's very difficult to do that with water. Before we would ever need to move water from the Midwest to here, given the cost, I think ocean desal will probably become more viable before that does, frankly. And more viable than ocean desal is get rid of all the farming in Arizona. I don't think that's a good idea. I think as a policy matter, we should try to preserve some farming, but if you allow the market to operate, that is the least expensive source of new water.
I want to get to some of these closing questions here. Younger generations and others are increasingly passionate about environmental conversation. If you could give them any tips on how to take action today to improve our water position for the future, what would they be?
Wow.
Go, Grady. It's on you.
Well, one of the things I tell audiences like this is we are not good at understanding how to talk about water. And it's a legacy of generations of the way we've dealt with water issues. We tend to either view water as something we take for granted. Turn on the tap, comes out, you don't care. And it's very cheap and always available. Or we gin up a crisis when we need to build something new or get something funded. So it tends to be almost a binary, no problem, huge problem. Neither of those is right. It's a complicated issue that can become a problem if you don't get ahead of it and manage it. We have gotten ahead of it and managed it well in Arizona, but we've tended to do that sort of enclosed conversations. Water managers, water lawyers, water buffaloes, we call them, who deal with this kind of stuff, talk to each other a lot. And we've tended to tell the public, calm down, we'll take care of this, relax, it'll be okay. Oh, but by the way, there's enough of a crisis that we need $20 million to build a new pipe. The public deserves a better understanding. And that's why I wrote these two reports, the one in 2011 and this one, is trying to do that. I'm not sure I've come close to accomplishing that because it is a complicated subject, but it's a subject that we ought to start talking to people about when they're young. The people who deal with water, the water buffaloes, are aging. Not Christa or Sarah, mind you. We need a new generation of people who want to be engaged on this and want to talk about it and want to report on it and want to write about it.
Can I think that's a wonderful question. And I completely agree that I often get, I work for ASU and I get wonderful, bright students who really are passionate about improving sustainability in the world, and they want my advice. And I say, go to work for an agency. Be one of the people, one of the passionate, creative, brilliant people within that agency who helps get it to the remarkable solutions that we have achieved in the past and that we can achieve in the future. But I also want to throw in that we need, when we think about getting more sustainable, to make sure that we're tying the measures that we're taking for sustainability, the sacrifices very often that we're making, to the goal or the outcome that we hope to achieve. And so that would be my other piece of advice. There's a lot of not too deeply thoughtful talk about how we just need to conserve more. I get scolding emails almost every day, scolding the Kyle Center for not pushing conservation to the max. And right now we're not in a place where rationing water is important. And I think it makes people mad that we're not talking with the note of urgency that they would like. And but if there are really good outcomes from conservation, but we need to make sure that we're connecting up conservation measures that we believe in, that we're willing to sacrifice for, with the outcomes that we want. Just as Christa said, if we don't have plants and trees, we'll have a much hotter city. And so conservation that gets rid of trees and even grass may not result in an outcome that we want.
Yeah, I appreciated both those answers. Last thing before we get to some closing remarks, we just talked about the younger generation. A lot of business leaders on this call today. What do you see the business community's role in supporting Arizona's efforts to ensure a reliable, renewable water supply?
I think it's key for them to, I was going to say, I think it's key for them to know where their water comes from and be part of supporting the solutions that we need regionally to ensure that it's available for us. That, as Grady said, we do tend to only come at you when we perceive there to be a crisis. That's not the prudent way to do this. We need to have ongoing communication so that you're as familiar with what the issues are as we are, and we appreciate this kind of opportunity to bring this information to you, and hope we can continue it.
As Grady was just mentioning, a lot of these conversations are behind closed doors, so it's great to see it out in the open like this. Go ahead, Grady.
So I was going to say, the business community, the number one thing you could do is give money to the Kyle Center.
Yeah.
I just got a bonus.
Got it in.
Give me a call. Give me a call.
I'm kidding a little bit, but seriously, being involved in things like the Governor's Water Augmentation Commission, on all the different committees and panels, the business community needs to be represented on all of those. And the business community in Arizona actually has a good story to tell. The semiconductor industry is one of the most efficient users of water around because they can run it through so many times. But I do think it is critical that those of you involved in the recruitment and attraction of industries to Arizona understand how to tell this story in a meaningful, and nuanced way, because I meet with a lot of businesses thinking of coming here, and most of their sophistication about water is, well, Las Vegas is way better off because they have a big lake right close, right? Yeah, most of the water in that lake is ours. It's not Nevada's. But that is the level of understanding of a lot of business.
All right, as we close, I'm going to kind of little round table go around the room for some closing remarks. Christa, we'll start with you. A lot of information, obviously, we've discussed today. Just how would you like to close us out?
You know, I think we've covered really the important topics, and I'm just really appreciative of the platform that Gpec gives us to be able to collaborate on these important issues. And I hope we can, focus in on some more specific water-related topics in the future, especially as it comes to the use of water by industry. I think that would be great as a topic for future collaboration.
Absolutely. Sarah?
I also feel really grateful to be able to come and have these wonderful questions and have this discussion. I would suggest that anyone who would like to get off this webinar and go find out more about Arizona water resources, that I'd invite you to go to our water blueprint, azwaterblueprint.asu.edu. It's an interactive map of Arizona water policy and resources. We've shown it to a Gpec audience before, but it's continually updated. So hope you'll check it out.
All right, Grady, you kicked us off. Now close us out.
So I always end talks about water by talking about people who will ask me, do we have enough water? And the answer to that is exactly the same as if I ask any of you, do you have enough money? It all depends. That's the answer. It all depends. It depends on what lifestyle you want to sustain. It depends on what do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren. It depends on how much more do you want to add to the people who can live in this place. It depends on how risk averse are you. It depends on how you balance the different things you can use money for or you can use water for. The difference is, as to money, it's you and your family. As to water, it's all of us together. And so we need to figure out, in a collective sense, how to answer those questions about what we want to do with the water we have.
All right, Grady, well said. Quick reminder before we pause to smile for a screenshot. Want to mention the Gpec Ambassador event. We hope to see you at the Collaborative Communities Statewide Social Hour. That will be on May 11th. And as a reminder, you can always check out past installments of the regional report. I think this is our 27th report now by visiting gpec.org/blog.